Hi, Misha here, and I've been kind of organizing Eaglemoss ships via kind of race, collection, what have you. Done one on the Romulans, a few different Federation fleets, and this one, as the title suggests, is on Cardassian ships. Originally, I was actually going to do this along with Dominion, do a Cardassian Dominion thing, and even recorded a video, but then a couple new models came in to wrap up the collection, and it just kind of pushed it over that line where if I tried to do them together, we'd have 15 or 16. It just didn't seem worth it, so I decided to break them up. Some of the ones on the table are specifically Cardassian, and some of them are kind of more generic, but heavily featured as Cardassian. For example, here I've got the Merchantman. Then here we have a very generic cargo ship. Here we have one seen by Bajoran and Cardassian. Here we have one of the most recent ones, the Grimal military freighter. Then we have the most classic, the Galor. Then we have the Hideki Patrol Ship, our fighter. We have the Keldon. And then finally, we have the one that came in today, the most recent one, the Orbital Weapons Platform. Okay, it's not exactly a ship, but it's space going. I nearly brought out Deep Space Nine, Bok'Nor, for this video, but decided I'll keep the standard. Plus, a total of 8 just seemed like a good number. So I thought we'd just talk about, well, I would talk, hopefully you listen, about the Cardassians as a race, and talk about each ship, and then as usual, I'll rank them in, terms of which ones I just happen to like the most. Well, the Cardassians were not in the original series of the movies. They were introduced in Season 4 of The Next Generation. And one of the best episodes of that season, in my opinion, because we got lots of O'Brien. The episode was known as The Wounded. From there, they were set up to be one of the major antagonists, and sometimes allies, and then very much antagonists, and then allies again in Deep Space Nine. And they were mentioned more than a few times and seen a few times in Voyager, along with Seska being a major reoccurring villain in the first 2 seasons. And I don't recall any Cardassian in Enterprise. I don't think we've seen them in Picard. And frankly, I don't care if they aren't in Discovery. I don't think they are, but I don't give a rat's ass about Discovery. Sorry, just don't. Interestingly, half of our ships are transport cargo ships or whatnot. Kind of shows you that the Cardassians definitely had a lot of commerce going on, and it weren't just strictly like the Klingons or even Romulans military. They had their own thing. They did occupy Bajor for half a century, and when we catch up with them in the Next Generation, the occupation was at its tail end, and then with Deep Space Nine, they withdraw. Now, starting off, we have the ship known as the Merchantman. This is from initially Star Trek III, where we see just kind of a human privateer, smuggler crew operating it. We see this ship throughout Star Trek, but we never really know who makes it. It sure doesn't look human. Be kind of neat if it was Cardassian, but anyway. We do know that the Federation and Cardassians had at least a couple of generations of interaction because there were major border skirmishes or even wars in the 2340s, 2350s. O'Brien was a veteran of them. Anyway, the reason I decided to put this in, honestly, this thing is a cool model, but we see the CDS, Cardassian Defense Ship, Bok'Nor, in Season 2 of Deep Space Nine, the episode The Maquis, and it gets exploded by Maquis terrorists, although, of course, we don't know that initially. So it's very clearly a named Cardassian vessel, which not many times in the Merchantman appears has it actually been named. So kind of almost by default makes it Cardassian. More than that, we actually get quite a few specs for it. We know that it was about 150 meters long. We know that it had a crew of 78, at least when it got blowed up. And then it, at that time, had a cargo of about 14,000 metric tons. And it seemed to be just a common Cardassian freighter and transport. There was no remarks about it being particularly old or anything, and it seemed to be at least in government service, if not directly military. But since we know this space frame was in use in the 23rd century, and even then looked old, that's why I have it at the beginning of the list. It's probably the oldest design on the table. Moving on, we have another old design, and a common hull design we see throughout Star Trek. Now this model is labeled as Bajoran, but we actually see it used by Cardassians as many or even more times. I think this might have been one of the freighters we even saw in the episode The Wounded. I know in that episode we saw some Cardassian freighters. Either way, it seems to be just a common generic Alpha Quadrant shape. The model itself actually started off life as the Husnock ship, and even that kind of has a Star Destroyer look. It's about 250 meters long, so a little bit shorter than the original Enterprise. It seems to have a lot of cargo space in that, mostly cargo space, with the main command section in the back. It has minimal shielding and minimal weapons. It does have weapons, but it's just a cargo ship. Very generic, very non-Federation. That's pretty much the design. But since we see Bajorans with these, it stands to reason that they probably got them from the Cardassians during or after the occupation. Much like how, the Vietnamese ended up with quite a few pieces of hardware from France and the United States during their wars. And again, we do see it directly in Cardassian use as well, in Deep Space Nine, in various convoys and the like, usually being the ship in distress. For such a purportedly aggressive race, the Cardassians seem to be in distress a lot. But yeah, this is more of a freighter cargo. The next one here, again, nominally Bajoran, but again we see this in at least 2 Cardassian convoys, so it stands to reason that probably the Bajorans got these from the Cardassians. This is more of a personnel transport that carries about 200 people. Again, it's about 250 meters. I don't know, long or wide in this case. Probably wide. Kind of interesting that it has these giant wings. Doesn't seem very useful for a transport. You'd think it'd be more boxy, but maybe it was more for atmospheric operations or other specialists. They're very thin wings. But, yeah, just a personnel transport. We do know that it has limited armament, and it was in government service. And it's probably an older design, again, because the Bajorans had it. Moving on, we have our fourth freighter. This is the Grumall type. This seems to be a newer freighter, but not super new because it was a well-known design by 2370. It's actually one of the few Cardassian ships we see inside of extensively in the Deep Space Nine. This is the ship that Dukat was given command of when he was demoted after Zial. I've done a whole episode just on this model, so you can check that out. It's a little bit bigger, about 260 meters. Has 30 some odd detachable cargo pods. It is warp capable, although it has powerful engines as far as thrust and pushing, but not necessarily that fast. It has disruptors or phasers, but nothing spectacular. Since it did take a few direct hits from a Klingon bird of prey, it has reasonably decent shielding. We also know that it had a crew of at least 35 and had at least 5 decks. Command sections in the back along with the engines, and the front has your pods and whatnot. This is defined as a military freighter, so although civilians might use this whole design, the military certainly does. And it was still, while aging, very much in service and standard in the 2370s. The Grumall is the most famous example we know of, but there are other examples. We see this 2 or 3 other times in Deep Space Nine. And again, unlike the previous ones, at least it does have some weapons and decent shielding, whereas the last ones really just had nothing. Moving on, we get to the first warship, often called a combat cruiser, the Galor class. We see this in the Wounded episode, so it's the first Cardassian warship we're introduced to, and we see it all the way throughout Deep Space Nine, in the last 4 seasons of Next Generation, and more than once in Voyager. It's a very interesting shape, very different. You can tell when they introduced the Cardassians, they were going maybe more for than just the villain of the week, Maybe they had some ideas of setting something up because they put a little more time into the ship design, the makeup, even the backstory. There's a bit of argument over the length. 480 meters seems to be pretty commonly accepted, but others say 375. Crew, 600. It's not as fast as a Federation ship, about Warp 8, maybe Warp 8.5. It's armed with plasma torpedoes and disruptors, sometimes called spiral wave disruptors. It seems to have at least one heavy disruptor forward facing and one aft facing, plus additional banks. We know there are at least 3 classes, 3 variants, 3 types at least in 2367, the date of the Wounded episode. The 3rd variation is considered cutting edge, top of the line. It's also been stated in some secondary sources that perhaps the first variant was introduced as far back as 2320, and these would have seen use in the Cardassian Wars. Also, they were used during the Bajoran occupation. They're classified as fast and powerful, but also not having the best targeting sensors and other scanning equipment. Very much a military vessel. And still, while top of the line, they often operated in groups of 3 so that they could be a potential threat to newer ships like the Nebula class or the Galaxy class, or for that matter, Klingon ships like the Vorcha. So it was an aging dinosaur, but still a powerful one enough. In what Cardassia used to be a regional power. You know, I kind of think it was like their Excelsior class. Maybe not quite that old, but that idea. It's just a staple, and it was used very much throughout the Dominion War. Still very much in production. Now here we're getting into one of the newer designs. The Hideki class is a smaller counterpart to the Galor. Seems to be about 100 meters, although some sources claim as short as 85, others claim as long as 150. It's kind of a multi-role craft. We see it used as a long-range, warp-capable shuttle. They could at least do Warp 8 to keep up with Galors, maybe a little faster. We also see it used as a patrol ship. And we see it used as an assault ship or attack fighter, especially during the Dominion War. Maybe even a raider, if you will. It could be operated by a crew of only 5, but a crew of at least 30 was more common, and I'm sure it could carry more and you know, if needed as a shuttle. This was a relatively new design. It was pretty unknown around 2370. Not cutting edge, but still a new design. So it does come after the Galor. Yeah, it gives the Cardassians a smaller ship. It is still armed with disruptors, and seems to have a pretty good power plant, because we know from some Maquis episodes that Cardassian colonists took these and put larger disruptor banks, although they were called phaser banks, from the Galor type in these to make them more effective. So it's kind of the opposite issue of the Grumall over there. We also see a few different paint schemes, including this ochre and more of a gray variant as well. But this is very much used in the Dominion War. And moving on. If at first you mistake this for a Galor variant, you're not wrong. This is the Keldon class. It is an upgraded and enhanced Galor. It's a little longer, at about 490 meters. A little more crew at about 700, including better troop transportability. It is faster, more durable. It has more advanced targeting sensors. It has a larger power plant. It's capable of at least Warp 9 and possibly up to Warp 9.6. It has the same basic armament, disruptor cannon, and plasma torpedoes, but it has more powerful cannons and most likely more torpedoes on board. This was considered top of the line by 2371. It didn't really replace the Galor in production, but it was mainly there to have a more powerful ship when needed. It was also built in secret by the Obsidian Order, and those ships were fitted with Romulan cloaks, which tells us this had enough power to, well, power the cloak. And these were developed in the 2360s to combat newer ships like the Galaxy, and then later ships the Federation would turn out. Newer Klingon ships and, Romulan ships as well. This was their effort, but it really shows you that Cardassia wasn't as economically blessed as the other powers, because they're kind of making do with a space frame that's 50 years old. In fact, it's been said that Cardassia itself was a relatively impoverished planet in a relatively impoverished region of space compared to some of the others. Nevertheless, it was a respectable ship, if not terrifying. We don't see this as much in Deep Space Nine. It just appears a handful of times. But at least they made an effort to give a new Cardassian ship. And then finally, the most advanced one. Again, not a ship per se. And this is the one on the table that's not from the standard Eaglemoss collection. This is a bonus edition. But it does play a prominent role in the last season of Deep Space Nine. This is the Orbital Weapons Platform, or Orbital Defense Platform. This appears in the final episode of Season 6, the first Battle of Chinchoka is where it's seen. These are automated platforms. They were designed to help the Dominion, Cardassia, and the Jem'Hadar, because they've been cut off from resupply from the wormhole, from the Gamma Quadrant. Also, there have been several losses after a year of war. This could be put in orbit or nearby Cardassian planets or installations to defend them, freeing up ships for offensive duty. It has 3 heavy disruptors. On board, it has 1,000 plasma torpedoes. It has regenerative shielding. And it's relatively small and inexpensive. And they were able to get away with this because they were actually powered via subspace with a centralized power plant, energy generator, which obviously was its downfall in the first Battle of Chinchoka, where the Federation was able to spoof these into shooting their own energy source, thus disabling the network. But that wasn't the end of the defense platforms. Later on, in 2375, we see these deployed in orbit of Cardassia Prime, to defend. And one would have to imagine, that they fix the shooting one's own reactor problem. Yeah, this was considered cutting-edge Cardassian technology during the Dominion War. It actually makes a lot of sense. Kind of like the Mars defense perimeter we saw in Best of Both Worlds. So yeah, that is a rundown of Cardassian ships, both freight and warship. So, how would I rank these 8 Eaglemoss models? It's probably a little unfair to rank cargo ships and warships all at once, but maybe I'll try and surprise you a little bit. Interestingly, we only actually have 3 warships. But ranking these, starting with number 8, that doesn't mean it's my least favorite. Well, I guess technically it does. I should rephrase that. That doesn't mean I don't like the ones higher on the list, as I remind. It's just, if you have to rank them, something's going to come last. So with that said, my number 8 will be the personnel transport. Now, it is actually a nicely done model. It's quite big. It's got a lot of metal in it. The wings are metal, believe it or not. But the front nose is the plastic. I think the reason it's the least attractive to me, it's very generic spaceship. And it was really never defined. We just saw it used by Bajorans and Cardassians. It's just there. The wings seem a little odd. Maybe that's just me. Still nice we have it, as I've said many times. That's what I like about the Eaglemoss collection, is they do these off-the-wall ships that no one else would think to do. Who's going to do a background, troop transport, Well, Eaglemoss does. So yeah, even though it's number 8, I really like that we have it. Number 7, actually, I'm going to say the Galor. Part of that is we've had Galor models before. We've had Galor's galore. We've had a few Playmates, we've had Micro Machines, we've had actual models. And Eaglemoss did not do a bad job. But because of how long it is, width-wise, it's pretty slim. And you'd think it was mostly metal, but it actually has a pretty high degree of plastic in it, which I'm not sure why they did that. Like, this whole back part's plastic. You'd think they would have, since it's not a especially complicated design. But oh well. Plus, as people have said, the paint job, the coloration's a little off. But it was an early entry in the collection. I mean, we have to have it. It's the Cardassian Galor. It just seems like they could have done a little better. Especially for such a unique design. But, oh well. Doop doop. Number 6. Pretty much have to give it to the cargo freighter here. It is generic spaceship. Again, and we see this freighter used by several alien races, not just Cardassian. But it's not, I mean, it's where it's at on the list because actually it's a good size model. And it's pretty heavy. Like, the top is all metal. The part of the bottom is plastic. But your whole top, so it's got some weight and bulk to it. I actually really like this one. It's one that, again, you wouldn't think most people would do this. Everyone does the warships and the hero ships. But it's background ships like this that make a universe, any universe, feel alive. And it's just kind of a workaday ship. So I like it, but it is intentionally made to be a bit forgettable, you know? So yeah. But they did really well with it. Number 5. I'm gonna go with the Hideki. We've had a few Hidekis in the past, but not many. It's often an overlooked Cardassian ship people don't know about. Very flat. The design is pretty okay. It's not the coolest ever, but you could tell they tried when they made it. The model itself is metal top and bottom. Even this back piece is mostly metal. So the model gets high marks just for being heavy and whatnot. It sits on the stand well. It's just a little bit flat. Anyway, something has to be number 5. It's one that I'm actually very happy they did, because a lot of collections, when they do Cardassian ships, forget about this one. I'm glad that they didn't. So, who's number 4? Gonna go with the Grumall, the military freighter. It's in the first, the top half, so I really like it. It too is mostly metal. For its size, it's pretty heavy, but it's a relatively slender ship. But considering how long and tapered it is, it's kind of like the early Earth cargo ships, the Horizon and the Fortunate Son. If you did a bigger one to make it wider, it would be just absurdly long, so you're kind of stuck if you want to keep the proportion. But I think this is one a lot of us were looking forward to, because it is such a prominent member, a prominent part of the episode with Ducat. And I don't know if we've had a Grumall model before. If we have, we've only had a couple. So I think they did a good job. Not even really seeing how they could have done better, frankly. But, you know, it is a cargo ship, so gotta be somewhere, right? Number 3 is one that surprised me. The Orbital Weapons Platform. I wasn't even sure if I was going to buy this one. Again, it's a special, so it's add-on. But I figured I've already got Bok'Nor, Deep Space Nine, so having this to go with it, not bad. And I'm really glad I did. This might be the heaviest one on the table. The whole base, arms, and whatnot are metal. The center part, metal. The only plastic, even those are mostly metal. Yeah, there's basically no plastic except for some tips and sticky out bits. So it is a very chunky little thing, which is good because the specials do, or the bonus editions do cost a smidgen more than the regular. But it's very well executed. And the whole 3-tier tapered setup is very reminiscent of the Deep Space Nine space station. So I think it's really spiffy. And I don't think anyone's ever done this model. It's different. Number 2, the Merchantman. This is just a kind of known for being an excellent model. Now, I will say it has a lot of plastic in it because of the detailing. So that I'm not always a big fan of, but aside from that, it's a very good size, very big. Lots of details. And again, when you're doing like a setup or a display, this can stand for an alien ship from several races because of how many times it was reused. It can even serve as Klingon. If you really wanted to, you could even get one and paint it green and it could be the Klingon ship. It does have weight to it because of the size. Even though a lot of the external parts are plastic, the bottom and front are all metal. Of course, the engines in the back are plastic. It is such an opposite ship to the Federation. It doesn't have that sleekness that a Federation ship would, and it doesn't have that menace that a Romulan or Klingon. It is definitely its own thing. It's just a well-done ship, and I think one that, again, most of us were looking forward to for a long time. And Star Trek 3 brought us a lot of new models to begin with. This was in a movie. You know, we had the Grissom, we had the Excelsior for the first time, we had the Klingon Bird of Prey for the first time, we had Space Dog for the first time in that movie, and we had this lowly little merchantman that still managed to stand out, if nothing else, because it's kind of so ugly that it's cool. Sometimes I think it's ships like this that inspired things like Firefly later on. And of course, number 1, probably not much of a surprise. The Keldon really had to be my number 1 for a few reasons. It's different. You don't see many Keldon models, although there are a few out there. They corrected a number of the issues with the Galor. This has a higher metal content, has more just stuff going on, and it's just a neat one to see. And as I've told the story a couple of times, this model, for whatever reason, didn't appear on the Eaglemoss website for a long time. Like, not out of stock, but I mean, just for whatever reason, I think they forgot to list it. but I was lucky and found one in stock at a third-party vendor. Placed an order for it, and it came in on or very close to my birthday. And just right after I ordered it, they went out of stock on that website. So if I hadn't jumped on it then, I might have had to have waited 6 months till Eaglemoss finally put the Keldon on their site. So that does kind of make me appreciative of it. But I do think it's a neat design. It's both unique but still very distinctly Cardassian. Even though it wasn't seen in many episodes, it really fleshes out our fleet, and it's just the one I all around appreciate the most for a myriad of reasons, between Eaglemoss's design construction, the ship being unique but also recognizable, and a fun little story of how I got it. So yeah, there you have my lineup. Hope you enjoy these kind of fleet overview videos. I've been doing them now that we're at the end of the Eaglemoss collection, at least the end of the standard line. They say they still do specials and stuff, but yep. And I don't believe we'll get any more Cardassian ships. If nothing else, I don't know what they'd be. We pretty much have the ones we've seen on screen now. So yeah, feel free to comment below. Let me know which ones you like or don't like. I appreciate you tuning in, and I will catch you very soon next time.